basically what happened, the standard of objectification and femininity, and when I say femininity, I don't mean like womanly, I mean like the stereotypical, archetypal kind of femininity. Those standards became so high, the kind of what was expected and what was performed, coupled with having to go out and have all this pornified, horrible sex that no one enjoyed, that I think they had to open up non-binary to say, but like, oh, if you're desexed, if you don't want to participate, you can always not be a woman. And it's interesting because it's non-binary. It's something that you're not something that you are. So the implication is the rest of us are binary. And what that means for women is the rest of us like being objectified, whatever. It's just kind of made real the objectification for everyone else. It's not surprising to me that a generation who thinks that can like hop, skip, jump to the idea that that objectification in and of itself is what being a woman is.
Welcome to the New Flesh Podcast, the podcast you deserve. My name is Jonathan Astro, and with me is my comrade, Ricky Allpike. Ricky, how are you?
Good, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, good. Why are you looking nervous?
I don't know.
You not?
I was going to ask you if you've ever been to a slut-walk.
Oh, no. Is there one coming up or?
Not that I know of.
Okay.
But this does pertain to our interview today. We do touch a little bit on the phenomenon that was the slut-walk, which, I don't know, is it like 5-10 years old? I don't know.
Yeah, I feel like it might be
happening.
5 or 6 years old,
Yeah.
that concept. One of many concepts we cover with Hannah Berrelli from REDFEM today. It's delighted to have her back. But yeah, the slut walk thing, just even the word is, I mean, it's obscene, isn't it? You can't walk around just saying sluts, can you?
I don't
If
think
I just
so.
walked around saying that word over and over again, wouldn't someone go, hey, calm down. What's all this about? And you say, well,
I don't know. It's very 90s Beavis and Butthead, isn't it?
Oh, yes,
they would say
is.
sluts all the time.
Very good. Yes. And then they do that bit in the movie where they get
Slot
mixed up.
machines.
Slot
Yeah,
machines.
slots
And then they
and
say,
sluts,
there's heaps of slots in Vegas.
Yeah.
And he goes, hey, that's the old lady says, there's heaps of sluts in Vegas. So that's a bit of millennial humor for you there. And we cover embarrassing, what it's like to be an embarrassing millennial in this discussion.
I think we might have embarrassed ourselves right now.
Yes, happens frequently.
Well, we need your help here at The New Flesh. We need you to leave us a rating or review wherever you listen to the show. We're also on YouTube, so please subscribe to our YouTube channel and leave a comment about a show you liked, or perhaps one that you didn't. Word of mouth is also a very powerful tool, so please tell all of your friends. And finally, to our Uber fans, if you love what we do, you can send us a little cash via the Buy Me a Coffee platform. Any donation here is very much appreciated. And now, on with the show. Hannah Berrelli is a Marxist and feminist. She's the editor of On the Woman Question and the co-host of the Ascendant REDFEM podcast alongside Dr. Jen Izaakason. Hannah, welcome back to the New Flesh and happy birthday. A little birdie told me it was your birthday.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it was my birthday a couple of weeks ago. Thanks so much for having me. I'm happy to be on.
Well, I feel like we should call it the Ascendant REDFEM. I think we should call it the Triumphant REDFEM because your numbers it's constantly growing. That must be good to have people, like responding to what you guys are doing.
Yeah, Jen has like a leaderboard. She has all these targets and goals, and I'm just like, yeah, it's great. People listen. I'm happy. I show up, and yeah, no, it's great. I so prefer it in so many ways to just Twitter and like Twitter threads. And I mean, it's a bit of a cliche to say, isn't it, that there's just so much misunderstanding that happens on that website. And it's a cliche because it's a bit true, isn't it? Like, it's just so easy for things to get so mixed up. I don't even like the spaces so much, even though it's a bit better. It's just because like the heightened kind of atmosphere of it being on Twitter makes people a bit crazy. And someone goes, this is being recorded. And you're like, oh. Whereas podcasts are a bit more chilled.
I've just noticed that Spaces has really taken off in the last few weeks. Have we all noticed this?
Yeah, I think Elon Musk really pushed it. I remember they had it for a bit and then they got rid of it. Am I remembering that correctly? They had it before Elon. They had it for a bit and then they got rid of it. And then, yeah, Elon brought it back. And these huge spaces where it's speaking to like world leaders and debates on things.
But I think you're right. It's got an adversarial, tone about it. And all the ones I've tuned into mostly have been. There's just something going on. There's a sinister undertone going on. It doesn't
Yeah.
seem like a very relaxed place. I mean, you've sort of already said that it might just be because it's on Twitter, but I mean, that's a problem, don't you think?
It is. It is a problem. And, you know, it's even gotten to the points now where I'll read a book and it's clearly just like usually a guy. Women write different kinds of pathological books, but it's usually a guy going, I'm going to prove my Twitter adversaries wrong, but in 50,000 words. Like it's like really like you can tell he has the opposition in his head, and it's not the best environment, I think, for um, you know, discovering ideas and talking about things, is it? And I usually find those kinds of books quite tedious because I'm like, well, I'm not that person. Like, I'm not trying to catch you out. I'm just much more interested in what you think.
Funny you should say that because we get criticism, you know, on when we post to YouTube and a few other places where people say, you know, I would have preferred if they'd, you know, what they're always
Pushed back.
saying is you should have pushed
You
back.
should have pushed back. Yeah.
This is the term that I don't think I'd heard until I don't know, like 2 years ago. Pushed back on that, you know, and they people there's a few people who want us to do that, and you know. I'm just frankly, I mean, I'm more interested in hearing the unvarnished idea of someone and where they feel, you know, I hate to use the term, but they feel comfortable and safe, and we're all just getting along, and when it's not about, as you say, trying to catch someone out, or you know, I'm not like thinking of the Twitter people like you know, not to. I won't even besmirch some of some of the other podcasts out there, but there's a big podcast that interviews people every week in the UK, and man, they've lent into this pushback culture where it's just like where you sort of in your mind go, I'm Edward Murrow, and I need to come at this person and really, you know, provide the alternative. What do you think?
I think there's room for that, but it can be reductive, right? Like, I think you end up, I think are you talking about Pierce Morgan? That's how I feel about Pierce Morgan every time I watch him, is like he has to, especially with recent events, has to kind of do both sides very aggressively. But I think that only works really if you're like a ultra formal, ultra above board, like BBC kind of journalist,
Mm.
um, that you don't know the person's pushing back pushing back opinion, you know, because then you get to say, oh well, this is just like being a journalist. But when you know what the person thinks, and to hear them push back equally on everyone, you think, oh goodness, there's something here that's really kind of inauthentic and performative. It's also this thing of like pretending you're above ideology, like you don't have your own opinions on things, that I think a lot of people like to do as well. Like the intellectual dark web thing is a bit over now, isn't it? But I remember when that was huge, it was like, well, I'm above labeling myself anything. And I'm, you know, it's like, well, everyone has a point of view. And, you know, the Marxist Slavoj Žižek, he says, the space in which ideology functions is exactly where you think ideology isn't functioning. And I think about that quite a lot.
That's a great quote. Well, on just before we move on from you know, so social media and things, you know, you're on TikTok and you do a lot of reactions from your perspective on there. Well, firstly, what's your latest video that's doing well on TikTok?
Oh, goodness. What was my latest one that I did just recently? I did one about mothers, because there's this bit of a thing on TikTok where women will talk about the unequal division of labor in their homes, like just like how much more work they're expected to do domestically, and what a burden this is on their lives and their relationships and their health or whatever, which is all great. But then at the same time, similar women or some of the same women will complain about their mothers who get exhausted and freak out and get angry at everyone for not helping out. So I think I did a video response to one of these women who was making fun of mothers, basically being like, oh, when mom gets all upset and starts yelling at everyone about not helping her. And I was like, isn't this like the same generation of people, mostly women, who talk all the time about the unequal division of labor, and men have, what's the term they use? Not learned helplessness, but weaponized incompetence when it comes to domestic labor and stuff. But when it's a woman over 45, suddenly we can just like mock her for pointing it out. And that video did well, though some people pointed out in the comments, which I think is probably true, that what ends up happening in those situations is it's the daughter that's expected to pick up the slack, not the husband or the son, and it becomes this generational thing, which I think is probably true. So
these kind of millennial mothers who are doing the complaining.
yeah, it's the millennial mothers. A lot of millennial women. There's like this. There's a couple of accounts that are like, if your boyfriend is doing weaponized incompetence, and the idea is that he pretends not how to do something, so he's not asked to do it again. So I don't know how to load the dishwasher, but it's like actually you just don't want to do it. So it's all about how to call out your man for doing weaponized incompetence. And then, yeah, like the next video will be like making fun of a 50-year-old woman getting upset at Christmas for having to do all the work. And I just thought that was a bit contradictory.
There's a lot of negotiation that goes on in a relationship. I mean, I think maybe people should talk more about that. Like, you should actually negotiate with your partner, like domestic duties and stuff like that, you know?
Yeah, I agree. I think it sometimes ends up being the expectation, but I also think a lot of women, it's what they see that they offer in the relationship. They're like, I can do this. This is how I contribute. And as a feminist, I can like recognize that's a part of like a socialization process. And I think it happens really early on in development. It's how you kind of see yourself and your worth in relation to other people. So it is a very much like, I think can be a very self-enforcing system, which I think is reflected in like the second a woman over 45 says it, then suddenly it's a problem. There seems to be also a lot of young women. I just see it on TikTok. I spend way too much time on TikTok. Like I've installed an app blocker on my phone so I don't doom scroll
This
on
is my
it
next
forever.
question, actually. But go on.
Yeah, it gets really gets really bad. But a lot of young women on TikTok, like when I point out like, oh, but like you'll be that older woman, like you're gonna at one point be 45. They just like don't see, they just were like they're like, no, what, like they can't.
It's funny you mentioned that. Like a lot of the gender critical feminists that were at the Let Women Speak rally here in Melbourne, I remember a bunch of them were yelling out to some of the young female TRAs in the crowd, "We are you. You know, this is what you're going to become. You know, you're going to become old one day. You're going to be 40 one day." And that they were yelling that sort of stuff at those women.
Yeah, the age dynamics. I think that there is a real lack of understanding. I think when you're young, you end up being quite naive about men, and I don't mean it in like men are these horrible goblins and men bad or whatever, but like if you don't have a male sexuality, you don't know
Mm.
the extent of it. So like, you think of course a man is like dressing up as a woman because it represents something complicated about his internal world or something, and not that he's a fetish. And yeah, I also just think that women's worth is so connected to sexual value and reproductive value that the second that's no longer in the question, it's like so many women just say like, oh yeah, like I just became completely invisible, like it was like I didn't exist anymore.
Mm.
um,
Yeah, I've heard this.
yeah, a lot of women internalize that as well. They don't think they'll become older.
Well, I was working at a counter one day at a thing, and a lady accused me of a boomer lady accused me of not serving her over a younger and vibrant and attractive young girl next to her. She said, you served this
Really?
girl over me, and I'm invisible." So she really took me to task. I'll never know the
And
truth. Maybe I did. I don't know.
yeah, I was gonna say, were you guilty?
Well, I never kiss and tell. However, it's a provocative thought, and I've heard the women in my life talk about it. My sister talks about she's approaching 50, and she sort of has this response where she said that it's almost a relief. You know what I mean? Like to be
Yeah.
free of this kind of
Of the
unwanted
male
attention.
gaze.
Yeah, well, no need to raise your eyes like that. Like, you're not doing the male gaze every day. But yeah, so she's talked about it like that. But it's a real thing. this invisibility cloak of 40 plus. Unless you've got to be hot, you've got to be, or you've got to be like, I
a
don't know,
MILF.
like MILF or a cougar. You've got to be cougar styles. You've got to, do all that. Stifler's mom,
Yes.
I also think there's something about this generation being what they call digitally native. So they've just been online their entire lives, which I can't imagine. Like, I didn't have social media even as an adolescent, so I just can't imagine like the iPad babies having grown up. And I think for them, what happens online is real and what happens offline is less real. And if older women haven't been on the internet, they haven't been, so they're not in the real world. They're not in the perspective in which to consider. It's not a demographic that they think about, I think, because they just haven't been on social media, and for them that's the real world. That's where the real things happen.
That is such a good point about, I'm so not about this whole representation obsession thing. However, um, you know, when we were coming up, we used to watch a great sitcom that exposed us to older ladies. It was called The Golden Girls. All right, and this was a great show, funny, and it was. Now that I think about it, that and Cocoon gave me an insight into what it was like to be old, and what it was like to be and particularly an old woman in the Golden Girls. They've all had these different, and you see how their relationships have ended up in that. But I feel like they don't even have that now. What's the equivalent? What's the modern equivalent? What's the TikTok equivalent of the Golden Girls? I don't know.
Yeah, and I mean, we just don't even talk about the elderly in general, elderly men, elderly women. I think people are really like,
Go and die. Just go and die. You're not hot. Go and die.
Well,
yeah,
you do see, 50, 60-year-old men who have now now identifying as women. They get a lot of airplay.
mm,
So
yeah.
if the Golden Girls was rebooted, it'd be,
Golden
it'd be
trans girls.
the Golden Trans Girls, yeah.
T-girls.
I mean, you said it as a joke, but some of the times the things that come out, but I really think go woke and go broke is slowly penetrating. You can see, I think the Bud Light thing was a big shift in all of this, and I think shareholders and other people are going like, oh god. I also think the Netflix numbers must be just absolutely dismal. Like, who after like a long day at work wants to come home and be guilt tripped, basically? It's just incredible. But yeah, no, we don't especially as the boomers get older, like people don't think about the elderly, people don't talk about the elderly, people don't understand how much work it is to take care of an elderly person. Like, I don't know how our social services are gonna withstand all of it. It's a pretty incredible.
Well, on a slightly related topic, have you seen a trailer for a new movie that's coming out by the Daily Wire called Lady Ballers? Have you seen this?
I did, and oh god, I watched the trailer and I was like, am I gonna quote tweet? Am I gonna be the no fun feminist? Like, oh god, like, it did seem at points funny, and I think it would be the kind of film that would be made, like, let's say, like, 20 years ago, before all of this, to make fun of it. But I'm also like, why is there so much, like, women in pain and women being hurt in this trailer? Like, women being slammed to the ground, women being like, I was like, why does this require so much imagery of women in pain? Like, what is going on and what is the joke?
Well, I think one of the problems, and John, you identified this, we were chatting about it earlier, is that because the Daily Wire, they are ideologically captured. I mean, they are very right on these issues, right wing on these issues. So to make, I think to make a great piece of cinema or even a great comedy, you sort of have to be in the center, really. Like, you have to attack it from the center, and maybe that's the problem. I mean, they're really hammering home the fact that women aren't safe when men get into their sporting leagues, basically.
Yeah, and I mean, I watched some of the Daily Wire because, like, I didn't grow up around right-wing people, right? Like, I grew up in, like, the most West Coast hippie, like, I, like, lived by a commune. There was like kids called like Ocean that I went to school with. Like I just didn't know
Is this in
any.
Canada?
Yes, it is. Yeah. Just grew up in like a very, very left-wing place. So I didn't know any right-wing people, and I was always just quite confused by them. So I do watch some of the Daily Wire stuff, just to get some perspective. And yeah, it's Walsh and Knowles, and a lot of them are like Catholic. They have like traditional Catholic sexual ethics, and they just want like a return to traditional patriarchy. But what I find it so confusing about that is the economic policies that they say that they support, for the most part, with some exceptions. I think some of them have clocked this contradiction actually and are talking less about it. But the economic stuff that they support completely undermines the family and makes creating a traditional family almost impossible. Like if you have like privatization and no social services and low wages and just like protecting the profit motive to the absolute max, those aren't conditions in which you can actually create a family. And it's really also interesting to see them try and sell it to both men and women, because you have a generation of people who, like, the men are like, oh, like the men's rights activists, like marriage is a trap, like she's just gonna like take you and take all your money, and she's slept with like 20 men now, and now she's gonna settle on you, you chump, and she's gonna take you for all you're worth. And women aren't getting married because they're like, well, what's in this for me? Like I make a good income, like I don't see why I need to do this. So it's very interesting to see them try and sell the concept, and they always do it in kind of like pseudo feminist terms. Like it's quite funny. They'll be like, oh no, like it's a partnership and it's beautiful and it could be like a meeting of equals. And I'm like, wow, like you sound like a 1960s like radical feminist. Like all of these ideas are like radical feminist ideas not too long ago. But it's very interesting to see how the right has painted itself into a corner. And I kind of see it in my mind like there's kind of like the new president of Argentina guy, like super capitalist, really into like microeconomics. We want to deregulate everything. Very like morally neutral, kind of very materialist. Like we just care about maximizing profits. This kind of like this the ideological inheritors of like Thatcherism and Reaganism and stuff. And those guys are sharks and they like making money. And then you have like the Daily Wire people who are like traditional, conservative in kind of the classical sense of the word. They want to conserve things for how they are. And those are quite two contradicting tendencies. And I think like the Bitcoin, like anarcho-capitalist bros have had the upper hand for a long time, and we might be starting to switch to the trads, but I just don't know how they're going to present that to people kind of economically.
Do you think that this might be an American thing as well, like a particular kind of American right? Because, like in Australia, for instance, and maybe you have roots in the Commonwealth, so I think you might understand this as well. But like left and right, as we've typically understood them in Australia, even if you're on the conservative side in Australia, you're not getting rid of Medicare. Everyone agrees that we need an acceptable floor that you can't fall through. Do you know what I mean? And we've got a range of other things like that are becoming just totally standard. Like our childcare system is I don't know, Ricky, what would you say? I think it's quite generous. Like
It is
really,
generous, yeah.
it's very
Yeah.
generous. Like we've got a friend who's a single parent, and she only has to pay $70 a week for her kid to go to daycare,
Wow.
which is like, I mean, so we've got a lot going, and I feel like, so even if you were on the right in Australia, that's immovable. I mean, the downside of this is that if you're on the left in Australia, you also are on a unity ticket with our asylum seeker and detainee.
Yes, yeah.
We've got like Alcatraz style policies when it comes to you ain't getting in. You know what I mean? You
Yeah.
come here on a boat, and we're going to send you to. It's going to be like Escape from New York. We're going to send you somewhere, just to some mad country, and put you in a camp. So we've got this weird thing but I feel like the American right is so allergic to the horror of socialism that they won't accept any of these measures. So you don't get the childcare or anything.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's really important to consider it in the context of the Cold War in the US as well. I don't think even those of us from Australia or Canada, and certainly not from the UK, understand like the anti-communist hysteria really. Like I think Noam Chomsky was right when he said like anti-communism was the official state religion of the US. Like it was just everything, like being a socialist in that country is like the worst possible thing you can call somebody. And I also think like we don't really have a religious right. It's not something that we've ideologically inherited. Whereas, people from Europe went to the New World in Americas because they were very religious. They wanted a place where they could be more wackadoodle religious than they could in the
Really
UK
let their
or
hair down and just
yeah,
go for it.
exactly, with Puritanism, in the UK or in, Holland or in wherever they were, so and then you had Reagan and the moral majority and this big cultural reaction to, like, the 1960s, and we just don't have any of that, and I'm trying to I've really made an effort to understand it because, you get in the gender critical movement, you get accused on being on side with the religious right wing American people. And um, I was so ignorant of I obviously wasn't that I was so ignorant of them, and I've taken some time to understand them. I really think that they have this kind of like moral realism, like they really, really believe um that you have to have these things tethered to kind of these traditional values or everything falls apart. They see it as the way things kind of attach to the earth, and I don't think it's something most of us can really relate to. And yeah, it's a fascinating thing, and I've gotten to know the difference between like the trad caths and the evangelicals and the reform people, and like even like a Ben Shapiro, like a modern Orthodox Jew, and like how it all works together. But yeah, even in Canada, like you can't touch abortion, you can't touch universal health care. It's like those things it would just make you deeply, deeply, deeply unpopular. But I think it's just like the legacy of a real fever pitched kind of anti-communism in the US that kind of carries this through.
Well, one of the things that we'd love to talk to you about, Hannah, is liberal feminism. And it's not your job to explain feminism to us, but we need you to explain feminism to us. We've had a couple of guests who've come on, and they sort of taken like we have all sorts on the show, and they sort of quite a bunch of them have taken aim at feminism from different angles. And I've tried to win the White Knight of the Year award by pushing back
Pushing
to,
back.
to be more specific about. It's the only time I've ever done it. I get on my helmet and I go, ladies, step behind me. Uh, I've just tried to say, look, maybe perhaps you could be more specific about what kind of feminism you mean, and it hasn't really gone well. But I think what they're trying to express is a distaste for, and you've talked about this on REDFEM, a kind of liberal feminism that is very broad and contradictory and embarrassing at times. So maybe we could just open up. There's got a few angles we want to come at this, but I mean, how do you understand liberal feminism, and sort of what time span would you put on it?
Oh, this is such a good question. I mean, sorry. I think there's kind of two ways to understand it. And it's like liberal in the classical sense, which is all about, like the freedom of the individual and self-actualization, like think like classical liberal values from like the French Revolution, and also in terms of meaning reform. So rather than like revolutionary actions or adopting alternative lifestyles or whatever, it's like what can we accomplish in the courts. And I think in the 1960s and 70s, a lot of liberal feminism was good. Like a lot of it was very good. I would like Betty Friedan, um, who wrote The Feminine Mystique, which is kind of the seminal book of what really kicked off second wave feminism. And it was about kind of the unhappiness of housewives. and this unspeakable problem that everyone was kind of unhappy, but was pretending to have to be very happy. And a lot of that book was, like calling back to those kind of values and saying, like, look, it's like wasted potential. If you give up your, your PhD candidacy, or you give up that job you really like to, because you have to just be happy at home and that's all you have to, and you just have to be obsessed with your children and that's all you think about, is there's a waste of human potential. And that was what I think could be fairly called liberal feminism. I mean, things in the second wave at that point were so embryonic that these kind of distinctions didn't really exist, but it's liberal and it's feminism. I think it's fair to call it that. But then I think the way that I understand the liberal versus radical feminist split, it's not even really so much a liberal versus radical feminist split. What I think could be more accurately described as the pro-sex versus anti-sex split. And you might think that's crazy, who's anti-sex? But when I say anti-sex, I mean critical of the sex industry, critical of pornography, critical of prostitution, critical of like objectification, having this sort of analysis. And there was a huge fight and a huge split between women who thought who were really taken in by postmodernism and kind of the ideas of Foucault. And Foucault has this idea of like the slave master dialectic, and really it's the slave who has power over the master. Ooh, how interesting. And they were taken in by all of this. And so they were into like practices like BDSM, like Gail Rubin, like she wrote Macho Sluts, I think, or a queer theorist who's obsessed with gay men. Very strange. Anyway, she like carved a swastika into her lover like during a BDSM session, and like Andrea Dworkin was like, I bet your like Holocaust surviving family is very proud of you. And it was this big kind of blow up. And I think that it's really useful for me to look at these things in terms of that split. And what I find interesting about it is, obviously, I think I talked about this in our last podcast as well. Obviously, like the pro-sex, quote unquote, feminists won, but they still, I think what people's frustration is and confusion, and what the contradictions people talk about, is they want to be like anti-objectification and don't sexually harass me and don't, hashtag me too. And if a man comes up to me in the street, it's sexual harassment. But they'll also talk about like how wonderful and amazing like BDSM and pornography is, like the most like sexually exploitative thing ever. So I really understand it kind of through that lens, though there's many different ways of understanding it. I think really the pro versus anti-sex lens is the best way to, and I think that's what people are mad about it. I do think people just hate feminism because it's some of it's very like challenging and no fun. You're always the person going like,
It's a drag. It's
wow,
a party handbrake coming in saying,
yeah,
I can't do
yeah,
this or that.
exactly. So I think it's that, but I also think the contradictions that people talk about, that's really what they're talking about.
Well, why is it so hard as a woman to admit that you're not into all of this stuff? Having sex with, I don't know, 150 guys, BDSM, OnlyFans, and other kinky stuff. Should you be persecuted? If you're not into it. I mean, it seems like women were bullied into going along with this stuff. And they're just not into it, generally speaking.
I think bullying is the right way to put it. Yeah, I think that's a really good way to put it. And I was like youngish at the kind of absolute height of this stuff. Though Jen tells me it was at a real height beforehand as well. I think what happened was the kind of enemy in the mind, the kind of like thing that everyone wanted to exist in reaction to, was that it's also American like cultural imperialism, but it was like this moral majority Reaganite evangelical traditional Christian that existed in the heads of everyone, and that was kind of the oppressor. That was the person that you had to exist in reaction to. And being kind of puritanical meant giving into this oppressor, despite the fact that, like, oh God, the religious right were so out of power and so unimportant at this time, really. I mean, we've seen that they've kind of gained some momentum recently, and it wasn't the case at the time. And I also just think like all of this stuff is very, very, all of this stuff is just very, very profitable for a lot of major industries like the beauty industry and the sex industry. And it's not very challenging. And I think a lot of women see their value through the lens of like sexual and reproductive worth. And that just plays right into it. You don't have to challenge any of those things at all. So I think it was a lot easier and a lot more palatable, but it does become like bullying. And for myself, like I had to think like, God, like who are these religious people, and are they really all that evil, and are they, and you get to know them, and you think, well, I don't really agree with that, but you can see their perspective and their point of view, and they really think that they're doing a very good thing. But yeah, it was just existing in reaction to this, I think, this boogeyman of this Puritan in the heads of every person. And it's so interesting to see the incredible backlash. I mean, I think Jen and I have talked about it on the podcast before, but people used to round up their quote unquote body count. Now there's a lot of like rounding down. People are trying to pretend as if they're more conservative, because I think just Gen Z like saw basically how cringe this is. And there's a whole industry of like older millennials, like I think of the Novara media types, who just can't believe it's over. They just can't believe it. Like they keep like publishing things that are like, why are Gen Z so sex negative? What's going on with Gen Z? They don't like, I don't know. I was
Do
going to
they
say
even
something.
peg?
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. I was going to say like chemsex parties like we do. Why? And there's just a real refusal to let this go. And I think the idea was like, the more men you have sex with, the more liberated you are, was kind of the idea. And then women went and did that and was like, actually, that was quite shit. Like, I didn't like that very much. And there is like a whole industry of like older millennials who simply cannot believe it.
Well, that makes me think of slut walks. Slut walks used to be a thing where women would meet in a public square somewhere. They'd dress provocatively, some even get naked or partially naked, and chant about how being a slut is great. Are slut walks still a thing?
No. I think that era is very over. It's very cringe. It's sad. Like I've your friend and hopefully podcast guest at some point, Germaine Greer, reading The Female Eunuch. She talks a lot about sexuality, and the title of the book is the kind of the idea of the archetype or the stereotype of the perfect woman is someone who is desexed, so like a Barbie doll. There's nothing erotic about it. Everything is kind of inhuman and at a remove, and really women are kept separate from their sexuality. Women have like a primary, she describes it as like a primary relationship of disgust with themselves and their bodies and their sexuality. And so I think, being charitable, I think the idea was, oh, if we're more sexual, we will like undo that. But the kind of sex that they're talking about is like the least erotic, like most pornified, kind of several steps removed, most commodified, like most bought and sold, kind of very superficial sexuality. But I think that's basically what they were thinking, was like, oh, women are kept kind of ashamed of themselves, and if we're more sexual, that will be better. But I think that there was a real misunderstanding of the kind of sexuality being spoken about, which was something real and authentic and erotic, and where two people with a subjectivity are kind of interacting, and it's just the most like objectified version of all of that. And I think it's really disappointing. I kind of see where those women were coming from. It's like, oh, there's nothing wrong with being sexual, but the way in which it's played out is just like you're still a Barbie doll. You're just like a Barbie doll with a hole. Like there's no other human thing going on.
Yeah. Well, there's this guy called Jesse Lee Peterson, and he's a conservative radio host and pastor, and he used to go around interviewing women at these slut walks, and his videos are quite infamous, I think, and they're quite hilarious and confusing. He mostly asks these women if they are a slut and to define what a slut is, and the responses are quite interesting. A lot of the women he talks to have had very few sexual partners. One, I think, confess to being a virgin, but yet they're supporting slutdom and in most cases calling themselves sluts. And it was interesting to me because I felt that has kind of changed in our time right now to people identifying as queer or non-binary, whereas back then they might have used that label of slut in some way to escape womanhood or stick it to the patriarchy or something, and now that's kind of been replaced by non-binary or queer. Do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's an interesting thought. I think that basically what happened, the standard of objectification and femininity, and when I say femininity, I don't mean like womanly, I mean like the stereotypical archetypal kind of femininity. Those standards became so high, the kind of what was expected and what was performed, coupled with having to go out and have all this pornified, horrible sex that no one enjoyed, that I think they had to open up non-binary to say, but like, oh, if you're desexed, you know, if you don't want to participate, you can always not be a woman. And it's interesting because it's non-binary. It's something that you're not something that you are. So the implication is the rest of us are binary. And what that means for women is the rest of us like being objectified, whatever. It's just kind of reified, by which I mean made real the objectification for everyone else. And it's not surprising to me that a generation who thinks that can like hop, skip, jump to the idea that that objectification in and of itself is what being a woman is. I got a TikTok comment, brilliant. Like, young women are so brilliant. She was like, "Oh, I just think they associate being a woman with men being attracted to you or male sexual attention." And I think that's probably the case. That's why lesbians are kind of apropos of nothing, assumed to be non-binary or assumed to be trans men. That's really interesting. I'd like to watch those videos. I'm not sure that I did watch them at the time. But yeah, some of them saying that they're virgins or some of them not really having all that many sexual partners. It's exactly the case. It was such a smokescreen. And maybe you can talk to Jen about it when she's on later, but she knows a lot of these people personally, you know, who are promoting this stuff. And she's like, "You're not a hypersexual sex pot at all. I know about your personal life. That's not the case." And it is interesting how people use politics to work out their psychological problems. Like, it's a bit of a truth that people, right-wing people who claim to be sexually conservative, have the most intense, insane sex scandals you could possibly imagine, where you're like, "I couldn't make that up if I tried. That's so depraved." Whereas people on the left, who are like, "I'm sex positive. I'm a sex positive queer soul sex worker," or whatever. They have like a boyfriend named Tom. They've been like with for 15
And
years
they're
or
going to take his
something.
name.
Yeah,
Yes, yeah.
exactly. Yeah,
As you said in the
exactly.
podcast, they're going to take his name.
Yeah. But no, and I think it's really interesting that this was put up on a pedestal and how separate it was from the reality of women's lives. Like, I think that the idea was if we promote this hypersexuality, women will go out and have a bunch of sex with strangers, and then they'll be liberated and connected to their bodies. But I think it just ended up women just felt very like objectified and kind of used and not appreciated, which is exactly what you would expect.
Well, if sex positivity is largely accepted, by the majority of people, why are beauty pageants not accepted, or grid girls, or the darts walk on girls?
Why are they not accepted?
Yeah. because they often, feminists try. Well, maybe it's not just feminists, but there are a certain strand of feminism that wants to shut down beauty pageants, that want to
Mm.
get rid of grid girls, want to get rid of cheerleaders, that sort of thing.
Don't come for the cheerleaders. Come on.
Oh God, that's really interesting. I hadn't noticed that.
Because I've seen clips of this. This happened maybe 5 or 6 years ago. Like I think Formula One, they were trying to get rid of the grid girls, and they're on some sort of Piers Morgan type show, and the grid girls are saying, "You're taking away my income. This is work I want to do. I'm not being duped out of it. I make good money out of it.
I mean, I think it could be like in my ideal world, I wouldn't want those things to exist. Like I just find it makes me feel like Jen likes the UFC, God knows why. And every time one of those women like walks up in a bikini, I'm like, why are you there? Like what is the what
They're telling us what round it is and looking sexy.
Yeah,
So
They're telling us what round it is, and the camera kind of lingers.
Do they
I'm like,
have those bikini? Look, I'm not. Don't really follow UFC, but do they have those bikini ladies for the female UFC fighters as well?
yeah, they do. And then just the contrast between like the lesbian UFC fighters and like you're kind of like, wow, this is the two very different kinds of women. And I think it was Hamzat Chimaev, who is like this Muslim, I think he's Dagestani, like from the Muslim part of Russia, very conservative. Like he was like, I do not understand the point, like why do we need them, like just useless. Like I think he's asked for them not to be there. I do think some women might use this stuff because it's so contradictory. You're right, like I'm struggling to understand it as you've said it to me, because I don't really get it, because I'm consistent. I'm against all of it, so it's not difficult for me. I could be like, I hate the objectification of the beauty pageants, but I also hate sex positivity. I think it might just be jealousy or difficulty. I think that I think they see, there's also this interesting strand of it that like sex and sexuality is like a human right that everyone is entitled to kind of in equal proportion, as if like having sex is like being housed, or having childcare, or any of those things that like actually matter. But I think that might be my way to explain that contradiction would be um yeah, just like, well, why don't all women get this kind of sexual attention? Why is it only the pretty ones that look like, you know Texas, like Americans, like with their bouncy bleach blonde curls or whatever? Why can't it be all kinds of women? I think would be maybe the underlying logic, but I also find it very confusing. Like I'm struggling to figure it out as I speak to you.
Yeah, it is interesting that contradiction does exist, because you get people that are supportive of people opening up an OnlyFans, but I'm sure some of those same people wouldn't be down with women going in a beauty pageant, for instance. Whereas those things are, in terms of using your looks to make money. I mean, it's essentially you're doing the same thing.
Yeah, I also think I know what it is. It has to do with transgression. So I think the whole thing of queer theory, I was about to say critical theory in general, but I do actually think it's really queer theory, is that if something is transgressive, that means it's good. And usually one of the bars is whether or not it's against something that the state says. So prostitution, the state was against prostitution, the state criminalized prostitution, therefore prostitution is good. Another kind of strand of this is the state criminalizes drug addiction, therefore drug addiction is good. And I think because the beauty pageants aren't illegal and never have been, and aren't transgressive in any way, they don't like them. That might also be what it is.
We just need to make them illegal. Then they'll be
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
no, just make it kinky. That's all you got to do.
Almost like, aren't you hungry? Like, you look like you haven't eaten, and whenever I see the beauty pageant girls, I'm like, "You just look like you haven't eaten in a very long time." I just wanna, like, sit them down and, like, give them a meal and, like, a cup of tea and be like, "What do you want to do? Like, you look cold." I don't.
Well, this could be a nice transition to come at this from another angle. I do want to get into the backlash, but I think we'll come back to that, because my old university in WA in Australia is hosting something called Porn-posium 2023. So that's just this year's one. So there'll be another one next year, presumably. Teens, parents, and sexual health and sexuality education professionals are invited to attend Porn-posium, a discussion featuring a panel of academic, expert, and community-led speakers offering a nuanced and multifaceted perspective upon pornography, sexual content, and young people. Speakers include Cam Fraser, Australia's leading sex coach, Kath Hackinson, qualified sexual health nurse, author and founder of Sex Ed Rescue, and Kayleen Kerr from eSafe Kids. So that's a good ad for that. Monday, 4th of December, if if you're around at the State Library.
State Library of
The
WA.
State Library of WA. I've been to the State Library and it's not a very sexy place. But
No.
so what's your first thoughts on this kind of event, Hannah?
I mean, it's just incredible. I think they're trying. I think what that is, from just the list of speakers and the thing that you said, is trying to preempt some of the criticisms about porn and young people and the kind of horrifying effect. Like the evidence is like not ambiguous at all about the effects of internet pornography on young people and their sexuality and their mental health, and really the internet in general on young people's mental health. How it really is like a serious health hazard to have a teenager on the internet. Like it's not ambiguous in the research at all that it's anxiety, depression, body dysmorphia, like it's bullying, like there's nothing ambiguous about that at all. And I think it's foreseeing those criticisms and trying to preempt them. And I think all of it is about, like, I read Kasia Ekman's book, Being and Being Bought. You should see if you should see if you could have her. Actually, she's really great. She's a Swedish Marxist feminist. I'll send you her name. But she wrote about a book about prostitution, and she basically said the whole thing about the sex work activism and the pornography activism is protecting regulated prostitution. That's the thing that they want. They want to make sure that prostitution and pornography is legal and that the regulations that do exist are in their favor. And if there's any other kind of model in any way, that's what they want to prevent. So that for me seems like, oh, if we acknowledge that there's a problem with kids and e-safety, then we can kind of preempt these criticisms and protect our industry. But it's so crazy how many academics basically exist as paid shills of the pornography industry and the prostitution industry. How some of these people have like our shareholders and are part of it all. They should invite like Melinda Tankard-Rees. Do you know Melinda Tankard-Rees?
No.
She's an Australian woman. She runs an organization called Collective Shout. You should also have her on, and her colleague Daniel Principe on. He'd be great. But they're like an anti-hypersexualization charity. So if like someone puts up a big sexualized billboard in the middle of a street in Australia, they'll start making phone calls and protesting and get the big billboard taken down. They like, if there's like things that are sexualizing children on Etsy, they'll get Etsy to take it down. And another thing that they do is they do talks in schools about pornography, and they send this guy Daniel Principe around to talk to kids about the effects of pornography on their ideas of masculinity, their ideas about themselves, the ideas about what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman. And some of the things that Melinda and Daniel say kids are saying to them are just incredible. Teachers being sexually harassed in school, like not even other students, that female teachers being sexually harassed, boys saying like, sending them porn, seeing like, oh, look what I saw last night. Why can't you do this? Like just absolutely horrifying stuff. So I think that this is kind of reaching a fever pitch where people are realizing it's the problem. So the pornography industry and the academics it favors has to, make sure that it's protecting itself.
Well, I got a quote here from the booking site. This panel features speaker Cam Fraser, Australia's leading sex coach, who will offer a sex-positive perspective on sexual content, close quote. Now, the fact is, that women-centered porn or softer style of porn or whatever you want to call it, this kind of content, that's minuscule compared to the hardcore stuff. So Ricky tells me. But the what is the sex positive defense of something like Blacked or what's the societal benefit of reality kings, Ricky? Or what about
What's that, John?
never heard of it. So, or what about the sexual trafficking or abuse material on Pornhub? Or the zero questioning, as we just sort of touched on this, yeah, or the zero questioning of who's behind these huge streaming porn sites. How come we don't know their names? They're the most successful, famous people in the world. We should be talking about them all the time proudly and saying, "Oh, that's who they are." But instead, there's this cloak of this veil behind who they are. But I find this strange dissociation between the way these sex positive people like Cam talk about porn and whatever, and the dirty reality of what they're actually, talking about here. I mean, what do you think?
I think they would say, everything is fine as long as there is consent. And consent is put up as this, holy grail of everything, as if people don't consent to things at the time and then regret them later, or realize they're quite bad for them, or go, oh God, like, why did I make that decision? That was terrible. Or consent to something that is objectively harmful. I just think it's that Gail Dines quote, objective harm is objectively harmful. Like, if someone is being strangled, they're being strangled. Like, it's objectively a harmful thing, whether what they said 5 minutes before or 5 minutes after. Um, and yeah, I've spoken to women who work in the women's sector in like rape crisis lines and domestic violence shelters, and the amount of women who are coming in with strangulation injuries that have caused like hypoxic brain damage, like permanent brain damage, for things that they quote unquote consented to, as if consent erases harm completely. And in UK law, I'm not sure what the law in Australia. In UK law, you can't consent to violence. If someone says, you can kill me, and you kill them, you're still a murderer. So it's consent is put up, and it's just individualism, and it's this postmodern idea of like, we we might be oppressed by various structures, but we can act as we can transgress and turn the tables on our own oppression, and actually we're the ones in power or whatever. It's just not how we talk about anything else that is harmful. We don't talk about like alcoholism this way. We're not like, ooh, the alcoholic has cirrhosis of the liver and is going to die imminently, but he's collecting change in order to, you know, look at all the power he has. It's just when we talk about women and children that this whole thing comes about. And I think they try to say, basically, if the magic words are said, all the objective harm, and it's also, there's the people on the camera that are being harmed, but it's the men and women and whoever and the children who are watching it, who, it causes mental health problems, and also all the people around them, the teacher that they go and sexually harass, the marriage that falls into trouble. Like, there's this whole spectrum of harm that happens around. And even in prostitution, when we talk about prostitution, no one ever talks about the women who think that they're in monogamous marriages who end up with incurable STDs. Like, this kind of stuff happens. So I think they would just say, yeah, consent.
But wouldn't a multifaceted approach to pornography also feature anti-pornography thought leaders or feminists rather than just a sex coach and a sexual health nurse? I mean, it seems very one-sided.
Yeah, I might send the details. If you send the details to me, I might send the details to Melinda and have her show up. I think that she could contribute something from the floor that would be good.
Well, what's interesting is this Porn-posium thing. It is virtually doesn't exist on the internet. Like there was a post on X that we saw, and then also
I think Angie reposted it from
Angie reposted it, and then you can find it on the booking website, but it doesn't exist anywhere else. It's hard to find it on the internet. So I think it's one of those deals where they're doing it, but they don't want too many people knowing about it because then you might get protests.
They don't want the publicity they should have.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, I feel like everyone should know about it. Like, and then you just go, then you'd get the attention. Then we could get a consensus on this. Like, it just feels like that if you put all of this to people, if you be authentic and you ask them, you say, do you think there's a problem with the way everyone's consuming pornography and, particularly at a young age, you think there's a problem? I think most people would be like, yeah, I don't know, I don't think it's very good.
I think the goal of something like that is to bring, because they also had someone about e-safety, didn't they?
Yes.
So I think the goal of something like that is to bring someone who's on the fence or who is a quote unquote stakeholder, such like silly MBA language, I hate it, but anyway, someone who's like a stakeholder in like the um children's online safety world, put them in a room with these porn people where they feel they feel like too awkward to really object, and next time someone brings up pornography and children's safety on the internet, that the people from the children's safety on the internet sector can go, oh, I went to this symposium and actually we had this really productive conversation. And it's about lobbying and preempting, and there's really, really powerful interests involved here. And like you said, we don't know who these people are. Like, we don't know who the mind geek people are. We have an idea, but we don't really understand who in fact works for these companies and what they're up to.
We should know about them the way we know about, Bill Gates. Like, I mean, the mind geek people are, well, if what they're doing is completely above board and something we should celebrate, like the creation of the iPhone and all of this stuff, then why aren't they on the cover of Wired? Why celebrating them and saying, oh, isn't this great? And the perverts in Silicon Valley should be all about it.
Oh yeah, and same with the people in it. Why aren't porn actresses celebrated in the same way Angelina Jolie is? Like, why not? If it's exactly the same and it's wonderful. And the answer to that, frankly, is a lot of them die. A lot of them, the average age of someone in the sex industry is very, very low. A lot of them are addicted to drugs, and a lot of them have profound health problems and profound mental health problems from their time in the sex industry. I haven't really encountered an exception.
Well, it just seems to me that these sex positive people and their whole movement is decidedly creepy. They come across as something out of the Wicker Man. It's they've got sort of a cheery, I don't know if you've seen that film, but it's a cheery demeanor, sanguine, cultish thing, and their obsession with just but lube and butt fun is it's too much. It's too much.
Well, I also think, was it Lacan who said, like it's like a kind of psychosis. Like, if something is based on denial, there can be no room for doubt. We see it with transgenderism as well. If if something is, we all have like transient feelings about many things. Like, someone might be very religious, but they have days where they feel like, oh, they don't believe in God or whatever. And if it's not based on denial and it's not like psychotic, it's something that they can talk about. There's like ambiguity. But if a belief is based on total denial, there can be no room for doubt. So they can't even like entertain for a second that there would, some of them have started saying, oh, there's problems with the industry, and that's about the extent in which they can take it.
Now, I know the label groomer gets bandied around a lot, but do you think this aggressive style of sex ed has been infiltrated by bad actors?
Oh, I think it's bad actors and useful idiots. Yeah, I think it's I don't doubt that there's like pedophiles involved. But I also think ideology is really powerful, and people believe some of this stuff. They really believe it. I think that they think, because something like challenging capital and challenging a market is so unthinkable to so many people, the idea that we could have a market that exists that no longer exists, is a really difficult thing for people to wrap their head around. I think it seems like an impossibility to most, if not all, people living in Western, global North, neoliberal countries, that rather than saying, oh no, like foot binding in China was a thing, it doesn't exist anymore. There was a slave trade, that was a market, it doesn't exist anymore. Like, that kind of thinking is not possible. Abolition is not even on the table. So it becomes about harm reduction, what they call harm reduction, which begs the question of, who are you reducing the harm for? Like, what harm is actually being reduced here? Where is this harm? And then the ideology says, oh, well, the harm comes from what they call stigmatization. If the thing was not stigmatized, then it wouldn't be harmful. It's just a stigma. But some things, again, objective harm is objectively harmful. I'm a bit of a moral realist in this sense. Drug addiction is the other one where this kind of discourse comes up. If you don't think heroin is bad and you just think it, being illegal is bad, give me your baby and I'll shoot them with heroin. Just like, give me your baby. Like, I'll give them a pediatric dose of heroin. I'm not going to overdose them. Like, give me your baby and we'll give them some heroin. No one in their right mind would. Everyone knows that this stuff is objectively harmful, but I think because they can't imagine dismantling a market, basically, they can't think of a way in which this would not exist. And I do think there are some really bad actors. I also think it's the people who are the most weird about sex who want to talk about sex all the time. Like, I don't think, like, you know what I mean? Like, I think, like, your perversion, like when Freud talked about perversion, he just meant anything that wasn't procreative intercourse. It was just the term for that. It wasn't morally loaded like it is now. But then other kind of theories of perversion is like, and Lacan's kind of theory of perversion is this idea of like, the rules don't apply to you. So, things belong in the bedroom and then there's the rest of life and there's these boundaries and these rules. I think it's people who don't have these kinds of boundaries or this kind of understanding that the rules apply to them. That's why often they dress in funny ways. Like, you'll just see them in like weird hats or whatever. Like, it's because they don't. You know what I'm saying? Like, some of these weird positivity people, you're like, why are you wearing like why do you have like brightly colored 18 colored hair and like skull earrings and like a weird, like, why are you dressed in such a eye-catching weird way? It's because they don't believe rules
Because I'm
apply
weird
to them.
about sex and I want to talk about it all the time.
Yeah. Like, if you like I have a problem with capitalism, so I talk about capitalism all the time. Like, it's not like, if you don't have a problem with something, you're not needing to discuss it. And I just think there are lots of people, and I do think every once in a while there's like, and I'm sorry to say this, but like, I'm just going to say, like, there's this overweight white woman, like, kind of, it's always an overweight white woman in like funny colored hair talking about sex as if she's talking about like a children's story. Like, it's really creepy and weird. And I just also think for some women, being sexually rejected on some basis is like so wounding and difficult that they're like, I need to now figure this out, this sex thing and why it excludes me. I think is another reason.
Burlesque.
Yeah, like our last episode.
Like
Yeah.
BBW, or you're not quite there. You just go hit some burlesque up and then you tick it off.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that, yeah. And I think that also a lot, I mean, it's in, we've all seen that Robert Jensen quote of him talking about it. Queer theory is just fucked with pedophilia because it's about transgression. That's ultimately what it's about. And what is the thing what is the most transgressive thing for most people? And a lot, like Foucault was a pedophile. A lot of these people were pedophiles.
Well, I think predators have always gravitated to the path of least resistance. Decades ago, pedophiles and groomers used institutions, say like the church, to help carry out their work. But maybe now it's the gender woo and sex positive advocacy groups that are safe havens for these people. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, it's like, if you're a foot fetishist, get a job at a shoe store. It's like, what's going to get you the access to the kinds of things that you want.
To feet.
Yes.
It was very evocative. That's why, just because it was like, I pictured them, they're like, someone's going like, I can't stop thinking about feet, so I'm going to go and work at
there's that episode from
shoes
Sex in the City where I think it's Charlotte gets a new pair of shoes, and she ends up dating the guy that works there, and he's obsessed with feet. Yeah, he's a foot fetishist.
I bet you that's not in the new show, because the new one would be,
it's all about
non-binary stuff,
non-binary queers and stuff. Yes. Yeah.
Oh God, we're really seeing, like, I think for a while, like 2020 was like the apex of like horrible, like they almost have the air of like TV specials, like about, trans, and now it's there was an ebb for a bit, and now I'm just seeing more and more of it again, of like, I think that they're finally realizing like peak woke happened and now people are on the way out, and they are like clinging on to the last bit of contract money they can get, writing about like non-binary Latinx, you know,
Latinx.
The tinks.
Latinx.
The stupidest word.
From my understanding, Spanish-speaking people hate that.
They do. They do.
It's
Yeah.
because it's European. What is it, like imperialism or whatever? They're trying to destroy the language. Like you're
Yeah.
saying,
Yeah.
you're saying don't mess with our language. But do you really think that we've come through this with tunnel and because it did feel like 2020 was like the Salem witch trials, and that it was just peak hysteria on all this stuff, and I, like you, feel some kind of I don't know what to call it. It's like the sun peeking through the clouds slightly, in a genuine way. Like people are starting to reclaim words, and we're seeing mainstream media covering some of these issues, and people are starting to grow a set and say some things, and but I just wonder what the world looks like. On the other side, on the other side of this, do we all have to pretend like it didn't happen? Like, do we have to pretend that people who, I think maybe it's too, late in the conversation to get into this Israel Palestine stuff, but I feel like that something about that event was transformative, and it really shattered this whole thing for me, and because we've got really interesting infighting happening, and now none of it really makes sense. Everyone's contradicting everyone, and you're either defending genocide, or you're defending murdering, raping terrorists. So it's sort of like I mean, what do you think? Where are we at, Hannah? Where are we headed?
I think it's on the way out. I would say keep in mind a lot of this is attached to the labor market. I think that's an important. So those people are still in their jobs, so they're going to go with like kicking and screaming. The Netflix writers, the HR people, the consultants, the whatever. They're going to go kick. Like they're never. I don't think many of them are ever going to admit that they were wrong. So I think it's fizzling, but I think it'll be fizzling for a while. It'll be at this low level for a while because a lot of those people, and it's about keeping the job. Like, I'm in this job because I'm a decolonial feminist who's, Latinx, and
Very good.
I pretend to be indigenous and I'm not, and whatever. Like, those people still have those jobs, but yeah, like I've seen it in the gender critical movement. I think we've basically won the war in England for now. Things might change if Labour get into power. But even Keir Starmer said women are adult human females. The appetite for it is very low. And I think I can pinpoint the moment where it stopped. There was like, like a vox pop where they go and speak to people on the street. And there was a woman, and they were like, oh, it was like this, I think it was a Navarra thing. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. But this man was like, oh, will you vote for Labour? And why or why not? And she said, just as a normal woman in her 30s, she says, no, I never vote for them. They're like, well, why? Why? You don't want Tories. You don't want austerity. You want, what about our NHS? Whatever. She said, oh, they don't know what a woman is. And he said, you wouldn't vote for them because of that? She said, no. And I don't know any women who would, who are around my age. And that clip circulated. And I think a lot of people in the Labour Party went, oh no. Like, I think after that went around, people were like, oh, like this is actually quite serious. And it was within 2 or 3 weeks that the Labour Party said women are adult human females. So now that the I think for now we could regress, but the battle has been won on this front in the UK. Yeah, you already are starting to see the divisions, because this is how social movements work. Often they coalesce around one issue, like self-ID or whatever, and then you get a lot of people from a lot of different factions across the political spectrum coming together on this one issue. And when the one issue resolves, it devolves into infighting, and that's exactly what you said. I think, yeah, what's happened around Israel Palestine is really, really indicative of that. And I found it yeah, like very similar to you, to be honest, like horrifying from all ends. And what I found really shocking was um people who are like, I'm a free speech advocate, being like, they should be deported. I was like, okay, so like the worst thing you could do to someone for speech, like deport them. That's mental. I thought you were a free speech absolutist. Like, what is going on? So yeah, I think this is what happens when social movements, when some of those issues become resolved. And I do think it's going to be a slow fizzle in Australia and Canada. The US is a bit more complicated because they do have the religious right. I do worry that they're just going to like capitalize on this as much as possible and be in power for the next 20, 30 years. And I also think the big elephant in the room that a lot of people on the left don't want to talk about is just how right-wing Gen Z are, like very like lowered support for gay marriage. On every account, Gen Z are like the most right-wing generation we've seen in a very, very long time. So
That was all bought and paid for, though, isn't it? They, that was.
yeah.
I mean, you could see that setup coming from a mile away.
Oh, completely. And I think the millennials are really reluctant to admit and see that. And like Gen Z, like I am a millennial, but they hate us. They hate us. I had no idea. They like share videos of like millennial cringe. And I'm like, oh my God, I've done these things. Like, this is terrible. But yet they know it. And I think, yeah, when it's things are just going to get real right wing very quickly. That's my prediction.
You know what really
Okay.
burnt me when I saw, like, because they do these things where they criticize millennials. They say, "How come all millennials have phones like this?" And I had this phone. I've got a leather. I'm holding up my phone, which is a leather one, which you open up. And they said, "How come millennials have got these leather things where you open like a book?" And that's what I've got. So burnt me deep.
I don't even want to share the ones that burnt me because it's all just too dear. Like, I just can't. But yeah, no. They're like, oh yeah,
I reject their criticism because, you know, we never said we were good. We never said we were great. Like it's not like we're not that boomers walking around going, we own
yeah.
everything. We've written all the best stuff. We've done all the best stuff. We were, you know, we're rubbish from the start. So
I think that they're like, yeah, there's like I don't want to adult today. Like, they're like, why do all millennials, all they talk about is like the student loans and drinking wine. I'm like, oh my God, like this all,
that hurts.
all too much.
I feel good. I don't talk about any of that stuff. And my phone doesn't open like yours, John. So
Oh.
I must be cool or
I'm
something.
not down with I'm not down with the hood, as Norman would say.
Yeah. I think I think millennials are quite sincere, and it was all about being like how I like Harry Potter and I'm very sincere, and then like Gen Zs are like the most nihilistic, like
Actually, I worked with a girl who recently who in social media. We got along quite well because she's into sort of movies and stuff like that. But now that you think about it, I was taken aback by her frightening nihilism, like constant, like everything was meta, terrifying and meta, and she moved at a million miles an hour, couldn't concentrate on anything, and just would constantly. I don't know, like her mind was a pinball, and as you say, it was. We did have I was frightened at the way, like, I was like, is this how it's going to be? Like, I'm going to be frighteningly out of touch with these younger people, increasingly.
I saw one of them being like, my mom is here just doing her accounts and signing checks. And I said, Mom, you don't have to have like a video essay on the background or like TikTok. She's like, I'd have to be 15 minutes deep into a video essay to do it. I asked her, how does she do it? And she said, I just focus on the task at hand. And this Gen Z just found this incredible.
Well, if they've got us to give them motivation tips and stuff, they're in trouble. Do you know? Like, if we're the ones giving them self-help, they're in a lot of trouble.
That's it. Yeah, that's true.
Well, we've gone over time. All we can do is thank you so much for being so generous, Hannah. And we've got our final question that we always ask, and we'd like to know what you're reading right now.
What am I reading right now? I'm reading Simone de Beauvoir's A Woman Destroyed. That novel, it's fine. I mean, I'm like 100 pages in, she's just talking about men a lot, and I'm like, I just don't. You've sold
Good
me a
book.
bill of goods here. It's not what I was really looking for. And then I'm listening to like a fun audiobook. It's like it's that book that was quite popular in the UK, How to Kill Your Family.
How to
And
Kill Your Family.
and it's about a woman who was like an heiress to a fortune, but her father refuses to acknowledge that she exists, so she kills everyone in the family. And it's quite funny and quirky and has like insights into British society that I'm like, oh yeah, that is true. Now that you say that, I get it. Yeah, that's what I'm reading right now,
Okay,
I think. Yeah.
I'll check that out. That looks interesting. I might give the de Beauvoir a miss. Sounds heavy.
Yeah, I mean, it's not very good so far.
Sounds heavy.
I mean, I liked the second sex. I thought that was good. But I'm also reading Terry Eagleton. He's a bit annoying and Trotskyist, but he wrote this book called Karl Marx is Right, or Why Karl Marx is Right, or Why Marx was Right. And I quite like reading like introductions to Marx because it's always good to be reminded of the basics before you like go into deeper things. But it is one of those books that reads like I need to argue with my Twitter rivals for 50,000 words. Like it's literally like this objection to Marx and this is why it's wrong, and that's fine. But yeah, it's not as captivating as I would like. But that's another thing I'm reading.
Well, your podcast is called REDFEM. Everybody should check it out. It's very, very good. And Hannah, can people follow you on social media? Are you on X?
I'm on X. I'm Hannah with a H. So that's HANNAH. And my surname is BERRELLI. Hannah Berrelli. I'm Hannah Berrelli 2 on TikTok. And yeah, the podcast is called REDFEM. We also have a Patreon if you want to support us there. But we release free episodes every week on Spotify and Apple as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. I always am like weird Australian summer Christmas.
You got no
So
idea.
strange.
It's hot.
Yeah, it's hot.
I bet. It's not hot here.